Several of you have talked to me about what the trip meant to you, and you talked to me about how God blessed you, and you talked to me about some of the things that God did in your hearts while you were away. And that's exactly what we wanted to happen. We wanted you to have an encounter with God. We wanted you to get away to the beautiful beach, just get out of town, be with each other, and just spend some time in intimate worship and Bible study and prayer and quiet time, devotions. And those of you that did that, and you did it with a sincere heart, I know that God spoke to you. And again, some of you shared some wonderful things with me, and it's so exciting to see what He's doing in your life. If you remember the theme for the weekend, I always want you guys to remember this, okay? I always remember the theme. It was called Not That Into You. Because this is not just concerning you as a youth, it concerns you for the rest of your life. And we talked about how in our relationship with God, just like our relationships with people, that sometimes we're just not into each other. I used an example of an old girlfriend I had in middle school in the 7th grade, and how at first, I was just so pumped up about her, so crazy about her. But all of a sudden, things just started to change. It kind of seemed like over the summer, we went our separate ways, we developed different interests, and the relationship was just not there anymore. It grew very stale and very stagnant. And, we had to end that relationship because we just weren't into each other anymore. And we compared that to our relationship with God, how we're not into Him sometimes. That, sometimes we don't know what causes that. Maybe it's choices we make. Maybe it just happens. But, we got to expect that sometimes we just won't be into God like we always are. And then we talked about, reasons for that. How sometimes we get away from God because maybe something bad happens in our life and we start questioning. Maybe it's a bad choice we make and we suffer the consequences. Maybe it's something we expected God to do and He just didn't do it on our time. And maybe we think that God is not what He's cracked up to be. And we get mad at Him, and that affects our relationship with Him and causes us not to be into Him. And then we also talked about we got to be careful when good things are happening to us. Maybe when God is blessing us or some very good things are happening in our lives, it's very easy not to be into God. You remember we used Moses and the Israelites before they went into the Promised Land as an example of how that could happen. Remember we talked about how the Israelites had been in the desert for 40 years and they were so dependent on God. For every drink of water, for every piece of food they ate, and just to be able to sleep at night, they were totally dependent on Him. And through that, their relationship with God was strong. And before they stepped into the Promised Land, Moses actually warned them. He said, hey guys, you're fixing to go into an incredible place here. You're never going to have to worry about water again. You're never going to have to worry about food again. You're going to be comfortable. But don't you forget God. Don't get out of your relationship with Him, because it's going to be very easy to do that. Because you're going to have it made and you're not going to be as dependent on Him as you once were. And so Moses warned them and said, hey, you know what? You may not be into God as much as you used to be if you're not careful. The next session was about the fight. We tried to get you to evaluate where you were in your relationship, to really spend time and just look at your heart and evaluate yourself. And then the fight was about a choice we have to make. When we find ourselves not into God, we can do one or two things. We can either walk away from the relationship like so many people have done in this world, or we can stay and fight. We can do what we have to do to stay in a relationship. That we can say that God, this relationship with you means so much to me, I'm not going to abandon it. And God knows, He knows your heart. He's not going to leave you. He will never forsake you. He will never turn and walk away. He has stayed in the fight for you. And so when we talk about the fight, we got to make up our mind that we're going to do what we got to do. We're going to stay in the Bible. We're going to stay in church. We're going to stay around our Christian friends. We're going to memorize Scripture. We're going to do devotions. And we're going to know that sooner or later that God is going to show up. Sooner or later, He's really going to reveal Himself to us. And that we're going to have that relationship rekindled. That we're going to be back into Him like we should be. So remember, it's a fight. We talked about how Paul told Timothy that, hey, your ministry is going to be tough. The Christian life is a fight. Every day is a fight. Every day we've got to make that choice that we're going to serve God and we're going to be in that relationship to Him. And there's going to be a lot of distractions out there. There's going to be people that are trying to pull you away from a relationship with God. There's going to be people that will try to discourage you in your walk with God. But what you got to do is you got to stay with believers. You got to stay with your friends, your church, and you got to continually make up your mind that you're going to fight, that you're going to stay in this thing. The last session, if you got to remember, we did this on Wednesday night when we got back. It was called "Do You Know Me?" And we talked about how so many of you had made that decision to stay in the fight. And so many of you had come back and you said, you know what, something's different in my life. Something has changed. I really can't put my finger on it, but I sense a shift in my relationship with God. I've been in the Bible. I made a commitment to quiet time. And I made a commitment to be in church around believers. And you know what? I can start seeing a difference now. I can see that God is doing something. But then there's also some of you that made that decision to fight. And you're saying, Zach, right now, I'm just not feeling it. It's just not there. I still feel like I'm stuck. I'm still waiting on God to show up. I'm asking God where He is. And what is the problem? Zach, what is going on? Why am I not feeling God like they are? Why am I not into Him like my friends are? And we used a biblical example to answer that question. If you guys remember last night, we used an example of Job. How Job was really into God. He was fired up. He was blessed. All of a sudden, just in a snap, just like that, he lost it all. He lost his family. He lost his business. He lost everything that was dear to him. And then on top of that, he broke out with these awful sores all over his body. He was in excruciating pain. And his wife even told him, why don't you just give up and die? Why don't you just curse God and get this over with? But you know what Job did? He didn't quit. He chose to stay in the fight. His relationship with God was so important to him that he was going to do what he had to do to make it work. And this is what he did. He cried out to God. He said, God, why is this happening to me? Why are you allowing this? God, why don't you just let me die? Instead of me having to go through this terrible disease and this terrible depression of losing my family. God, do you not even know what kind of pain that I'm in? And what Job was doing, and this is the problem, this is the lesson here. Job was looking inward. He was looking into himself. He was getting in a pity party. And everything was about him. And you know, we talked about how that's natural. That's our default setting when something bad happens. Is the first thing we want to do is we want to start looking at ourselves, asking the question, why this happened to me? But God reminded him. He said, Job, where were you at when I created the universe? Where were you when I made everything? Job, you're not the center of the universe. I want you to know that I am. And God was trying to tell Job how big he was. God was telling Job to get his focus off of himself and on Him and His glory. And it took Job a while. Finally, Job humbled himself and he realized just how big God was. And he realized that God was trying to get his attention. God was trying to show him some things. And when he did that, he was in peace. When he did that, there was healing that came to him. And he found out just how big God was. And guys, I just want to remind you not to put God in a small box. Don't minimize God into something that's just so small. God is bigger than we could ever imagine. And He wants you to experience as much of Him as you possibly can. But if we're looking inward, if it's all about us, then we'll never be able to do that. You remember I used the example of Disney World as an illustration that, you know, if we went to Disney World for 4 days and all we went to was a Magic Kingdom every day for 12 hours, that it would grow pretty old. That we would wonder what all the hype was about, what all the excitement about Disney World was about. But it wasn't until we realized that there were several other things at Disney World, like the Animal Kingdom and Pleasure Island and Universal Studios and all this other stuff, that we would be missing the whole picture. And that's the way it is with God. Is, you know, we sometimes just focus in on one part of Him and we try to box Him in, and we miss the big picture. We miss everything that He's about. And we'll never understand Him totally. He's unpredictable. But every day we can make a commitment that, hey, today I'm going to try to find out more about God. Today it's not going to be about me. It's going to be about Him. And when the focus is on Him, I'm telling you guys, He will do incredible things. Things that we would never imagine in our life.